Did you know that there's a debate still going on today that started before the ratification of the Constitution? It's had a profound impact on your life and mine, and it will continue to have an impact on our lives moving forward. I've been interested in politics for my entire life, and in following this interest, I have read, watched, and listened to countless hours of political commentary via podcasts, radio shows, and books that I've read from various political commentators. In all of this, I've found that there's one debate that started at the founding of the nation and that has crept up by different names throughout our history. We still talk about it today when we talk about things like the school system, the healthcare system, and more recently, the coronavirus pandemic response. It started between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist parties at the founding of the nation after the Articles of Confederation were put into force and before the ratification of the Constitution. I want to talk about the roots of this debate, and I want to talk about how it's changed and morphed over the years. I also want to talk about how both sides of this debate seems to see the other as an enemy and a threat to their liberties. They like to paint the other side as bad faith actors and bad people, when in reality, all of us want basically the same things, and we just have different approaches to getting there. I want to talk a little bit more about what the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists believed. They both believed, for instance, that they were defending and protecting the safety, freedom, and liberty of the American people. The Federalists believed that in consolidating more power to the federal government, we would be able to better provide for and protect the American people. The Anti-Federalists believed that if we did so, it would leave us vulnerable to tyranny. Plubius, a Federalist, wrote in Federalist II, "Nothing could be more certain than the indispensable necessity of government. And it is equally undeniable that whenever and however it is instituted, the people must cede to it some of their natural rights in order to vest it with requisite powers." He feared that if we didn't give the federal government requisite powers, foreign nations would be a threat to the American people and their liberties. He didn't believe that the states under the Articles of Confederation alone would be able to respond quickly and in tune against a foreign threat. John Dewitt, however, of the Anti-Federalist Party, wrote in The Anti-Federalist that he feared the Constitution was not easily enough amended. He feared that the only real way that the Constitution would ever be amended was via force of arms, and he desperately wanted to avoid another war. He also didn't believe in writing laws that his children and their children would have to live by. He thought that as we wrote laws, they should then be frequently revisited and reapproved in order to not force the American people to live under laws which they had not agreed to. The debate has changed over the years. After the ratification of the Constitution, the Anti-Federalist Party was defunct, and since then both parties have fallen out. The beliefs, however, that they both held have never become irrelevant. We still debate based on that same heart today. Many people still argue for a vaster and more powerful federal government, and many people still argue for a smaller and less powerful federal government while leaving more power to the states. I want to talk about some of those debates on both sides. Eduardo Port of the New York Times wrote an article arguing for bigger government and higher taxes. He wrote that American people believe that the government has a responsibility to help American families. He and many other Americans believe that a government as large and as powerful as the American government has that responsibility to provide the basic necessities for its people. He also points out that the government has had to grow at a federal level at certain points in time to secure the rights and freedoms of people, like we saw with securing the rights of the African American people. Ryan Messmore, however, of Heritage.org, wrote an article about how big government would be problematic for the American people. He argues that the more that the government provides for its people, the more control and influence it wields over them as well. He argued also that a government that provides can demand allegiance, and misplaced allegiance is a threat to democracy. He wrote further that to provide for the American people, the moral case for good but limited government rests on the competency of other institutions to provide for the needs of citizens and to cultivate the virtues necessary to fulfill the moral obligations that sustain a free society. He and many other Americans believe that instead of leaning on the government to provide basic necessities for people who can't do so for themselves, we should lean on other institutions, such as charities and churches, to provide those needs. Today's topics that we still debate, or at least some of them, are the primary and secondary education system, the healthcare system, and more recently the coronavirus pandemic response. In the school system that we have today, it's sort of a mashup between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist points of view. The federal government has mandates and basic minimums that have to be met, but the states have some leeway in how they meet those. There are people on both sides of the debate. Some would argue that the federal government needs to be more involved, and that only in involving the federal government are we able to level the playing field of education and provide a balanced education for all of Americans across the country. On the other side of the debate, people would argue that we don't need the same education for all people across the nation. They would argue that people in Kansas would not learn as well the same lessons that people in New York City might be receiving. They argued that to teach those lessons and the hearts of them, we might need to vary what we're doing. In the healthcare system, many argue that we need to provide healthcare in a socialized system like is seen in Great Britain or Canada. Others argue that though Great Britain and Canada have a socialized system which provides healthcare for all of their people, the quality is not as good as we see here in America. They argue that only when relying on private industries and people like churches and church leaders to provide healthcare for those who can't afford it, while leaving the healthcare system in the private realm, can we hope to provide the best care for people across the country. In the coronavirus response, we've seen some people argue that the federal government needed to become more powerful and to lay out rules and guidelines and regulations across the nation, and that only in doing so would we be able to best protect all of the states. That if all the states had the same regulations, it would help to mitigate spread from state to state, and it would help to protect the American people. On the other side of the aisle, people argue that the federal government covers too vast and various a range of people, that it needed to be left up to governors and other local leaders to make those decisions, to decide what and if we will enforce any regulations or restrictions. Both sides of this debate have a tendency to hate the other side, to paint them as bad faith actors and bad people. We have a tendency as people to assume the best motivations for people that we agree with and the worst motivations for those with whom we disagree. In reality, the people that we agree with probably do have the best of motivations, but also so do the people with whom we disagree. When you boil down arguments from both sides and you look at the reasons they're arguing, we find that almost all people want the same things. We want to be safe, we want to be free, and we want our families to have the same benefits. If you watch the opinion sections of the news, you will see, however, people who just tear into each other back and forth on both sides and paint the others as bad people who just want everyone else to suffer. It's important that as we have this debate, we learn to disagree, but to stay civil and respectful. The debate's not going away. It will probably live on until the end of times, or until the end of a free people governing themselves, whichever comes first. It rests in the debate over the school system, it rests in the debate over the healthcare system, and it rests in the debate over the more recent coronavirus pandemic response. It will continue to crop up in various ways as time passes and new issues arise. And what I hope that we can take away from this is an appreciation for the debate and the importance of it even in our day, and for an appreciation for the other side and what they're arguing. We don't have to agree with them, but hopefully we can at least understand that they're coming from a good place and that we all want the same things. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your feedback.